It wasn't right. Nothing was right. Must everything conspire to fail at the very time when it was all most needed?
First Officer Menderash Postal, Fastal, Bridge.
The perfect time for a call to the bridge, I thought. Keep it running, I told the engineer, who was dripping with the slick, colourless oils of the reserve thruster. Log updates and report to me at status before the hour's end. He bowed and turned back to re-enter the worker's shaft into the depths of the hot, sticky engine. I made the journey from the engine spaces up 8 floors, heading for the bridge of Intrepid. I could only see one reason for my calling, for taking me from overviewing the desperate ills plaguing the vessel. The Prince, our captain, was due to arrive, and I would deliver to him my report before we were set to exit the atmosphere. I would have laid it out to him, transparent and honest. It was a policy, a standard I held myself to. If I expected my workers to grant me rectitude, then I should grant it to my superiors likewise. The proud side of my ego knew that it had allowed me to rise through the ranks to the trusted position I owned. I passed workstations and personnel I knew thoroughly, hatches and corridors and lounging areas that had housed me for countless years. It was my ship, my second home. The old captain was gone, a good friend who trusted my opinions as if I too were a respected prince. We dragged this pile of metal through war zones, scouting the stars and surveying planets as and when our mission required. Now, the new prince would arrive. Young, naive. He would know nothing of her intricate workings, her flaws and her itches. Of course, it was his first ship, having been granted a promotion for his part played in the Yerk War. Not for his work on a bridge. Not for leading a ship's team. No. He had no such experience. He was self-trained in combat. Prince Aximili Esgruth Istil, as far as I was concerned, didn't even know the basics. If he didn't lean entirely on my shoulder, he would crumple to the ground faster than a fresh amputee. That was the source of my concern. If I didn't come across as condescending, I would be snarky. I would come across as disrespectful to one of higher rank. Maybe he would understand, though maybe he wouldn't. Either way, it would be bad news I had to break. I emerged onto the bridge to the rush of escorts and stewards. The prince had arrived, sure enough, with the usual wave of panicked activity. Such needless tradition, such self-congratulatory nonsense. He was standing aside from it all, gazing ponderously through the bridge, placing panels and people in his mind. So young, he was barely more than a child, maybe half my age. Dutifully, I stepped over to him when it became clear that he was not involved in any of the interactions around us. I bowed, and he returned it. Prince Aximili Esgruth Istil, I am First Officer Menderash Postal Fastal. Welcome aboard, Intrepid. Thank you, First Officer, he replied. I'm happy to finally be here. She's a beautiful ship. She always has been, I said. My main eyes resided on him, silently and unintentionally studying. His own would twitch around, unrestrained by wide lids. His gaze would not rest, and nor would his hands, which couldn't decide whether to fiddle with each other or work to strike a proud pose by laying clasp to his hips. He was more lost than I could have anticipated. Our aim is to be out of the atmosphere within 4 hours, he said, finally setting to cross his arms over his chest. We'll make track for the Assisi galaxy and begin scouting there. The navigator has shown me the course desired. Is the ship ready? My prince, I started, hesitating to break the news. She's not space-worthy. Prince Aximili blanked, immediately uncertain. Excuse me? She's not space-worthy, my prince, I repeated. Our reserve thrusters are down. The long-range radar systems are faulty. Defense weaponry tracking is askew. My prince, she is not at optimum condition. I don't know what lay behind it, but his stare was one of frustration and anger. He stepped away to look from the bridge, out to the spaceport ahead. Not spaceworthy, he uttered. With hope, we can have the ship brought to a suitable condition within 5 days. 5 days? He blurted, swivelling back to me. We have a deadline. set by the War Commander. This ship is tasked to root out any Yeerk activity at immediate notice. I understand that, my prince, but we cannot move this ship until the backup systems are operational. I could see the panic in him. With each passing second, it became more apparent, and he could no longer connect our eyes. His tail twitched anxiously, and he rested a hand on the console closest to him. Something wasn't right. Either he was piling too much pressure on himself, or somebody else was. My concern was heightening. "What has caused it?" he said. "Why are these systems down?" "We're doing what we can to find out. It's a cruel coincidence that all these breakdowns have occurred at this time." He stepped forward, determined. "Are these repairs that can be carried out in transit?" I was stunned. Why would he be so eager to get us moving for a scouting task? I was beginning to jump to a conclusion in my mind. "Well, yes," I uttered, "but it would be best to have the repairs done before we move." "The War Commander has put this deadline on me," he urged. "We need to get moving. If we can perform these repairs on the move, then that's what we'll do." "With all due respect, my prince, this is a case where crew safety should be paramount. If we enter space without reserve thrusters, we risk stranding. We have enough oxygen to account for 3 days of stranding, and transit to Assisi requires at least 7 days' worth. As your first officer, I implore you to consider a delay so that repairs can take place." "I value your input, First Officer Menderash, but the War Commander has placed our task as priority. We must begin." Priority? For scouting? I was baffled. Scouting tasks were never identified as priority. The war was over, and any remaining Yeerks were left without networks. It was a clean-up job. Prince Aximili must have misheard the instructions, but I daren't suggest it. From all I'd heard, Prince Aximili, despite his age, was level-headed and reasonable. He prized the safety of his peers. This, however, was in contradiction to that. He was rushing, and he wasn't thinking straight. I knew the ship far better than he did, and he must have known that. He had begun to step away, but I trotted along beside him. "My prince, I know this ship. I know her operational capability and what it takes to get her moving at a high standard. On top of that, I know this crew. If you set off without ensuring their safety, you will have a much bigger problem on your hands than downed reserve thrusters." He stomped over and snapped his head around to me. "First Officer Menderash, I understand your concerns. If you are threatening mutiny, then I will have no choice but to find another to take your place." "I threaten no such thing," I seethed. "As First Officer, it is my duty to stand by you in every decision you make, no matter how wrong. If the worst were to happen, I would take just as much heat from my crew. Listen to me. This ship is not space-worthy." His anger subsided, and fear took its place. This child was way out of his depth, stuck between a twitchy war commander and me with a whole ship at his fingertips. I should have felt sorry for him, but this was precisely what he'd signed up for. He couldn't be here if it weren't for the ability and courage to make such decisions. He was no leader. "I must follow his command," Prince Aximili stuttered. "We will repair the ship in transit, and will make way for the Assisi Galaxy tonight. Make sure this message is spread, and then we'll be ready to maneuver. Be it on both our heads, Prince Aximili," I warned, before my bow allowed him on his way. I placed a hand to my forehead in frustration and leaned against the bridge radar panel. With stalk eye still alert, the flashing of the holograms caught me. The error message flooding the glow had been ever present in the background. It was a system I'd yet to note an error in, another for the list. "First Officer Menderash," somebody called. It was Ariat Yerfalat Isther Falern. He was the coordinator of the dock team. "I've been informed of the difficulties." Errors, I grumbled. "Broken systems everywhere." "Is there to be a delay?" he pressed. I took myself away from the panel to stand straight. "No. Voyage begins tonight at the scheduled time by order of the captain. Ensure the dock team is ready to lift us away an hour beforehand." He bowed. "Yes, sir." The Ariat left the bridge. The confirmation of flight would spread throughout the ship, and I could already sense the groans of disbelief. Prince Aximili would not get off to the glorious start that perhaps he wanted. Never before Would I have taken flight in a ship so unready? She wasn't prepared, and so neither was I. I was filling with a cold dread, a paranoia that threatened every scenario in my head. Why were we a priority? What about a simple Yerk sweep across 3 empty galaxies was so important? I had a duty to fulfill. I'd perhaps already given the Prince an impression that I was stubborn and whiny. No matter what, I would stick by his side, no matter how fatal his decision may end up being. One thing was for certain of it all. This was to be no ordinary task.